So our final speaker for the afternoon is our own Dr. Marta Guron, who is the managing director of CSSM. So Marta received her BA in chemistry from Cornell and completed her PhD in inorganic chemistry here at Penn, studying high boron content polymers with my former colleague, Professor Larry Snedden. Marta has committed over a decade to community outreach efforts in chemical education, and has focused her sustainability efforts on educating the public on the opportunities and challenges in plastics, with the focus on how polymer structure affects the behavior of plastics. Marta is currently engaged with the ACS in developing general chemistry curricula materials using systems thinking through a sustainability lens, and with a special focus on metal scarcity. Of course, she's also, as I said, our managing director of CSSM. Marta, it's great to have you speak to the group in this context. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I know we are small, but we are mighty, and I'm hoping that we will, pass on the word and get a little bit more momentum around what we're doing here. And a lot of what we're talking about in the course of this conversation is going to be really centered around activities that I've done, as I mentioned, over about the past decade, through various different programs with different cohorts of people in different spaces. So what I really want to focus on here is the meaningful part of outreach. A lot of people are aware of outreach as sort of a, this is a broader impacts idea or something to that effect, but to necessarily think about why is that a thing? Why is this a thing that the NSF asks of us? Why is this a thing that that people commit whole lives to sometimes? And I think that there's some benefit to thinking about that and to looking at that. So the question is, there's sort of some things that we want to talk about. Why are we doing outreach? How do we support future scientists? What is our current outreach program that we're putting forth moving forward? How do we plan for stakeholders who are going to be involved in whether it's assessment or deciding the relative success or failure of the program, or whether they want to provide support or any of those things? How do we plan for those people? How do we design for inclusion and make sure that we're thinking about all the different types of people who will be involved in the program? And of course, promoting your efforts, because unless people know that you're doing something, it's going to be really hard to convince people to keep supporting you doing something. So there is that aspect of it too, which I think gets overlooked a lot. So you'll find there's a number of photos in a lot of these things. Clearly, some of these are pre-COVID, some of these are during COVID. But these are some of the students that I've worked with in the past when we would do some on-site visits. And the reason that I share this is because I want to give you a sense of, these are all people who are, some of them were freshmen, some of them were seniors, some of them were grad students. They're kind of a mixed bag, and they came to the program for various reasons, as many of you may be finding yourselves in that space as well. So why do we do K through 12 outreach? As you can see, the little kids are wearing masks, so you can tell this is from this past year. So all pretty recent. Why do we do it? It provides resources to people in facilities that may not have them. It's a social justice issue, at least at some core. Now, you can do outreach to places that have resources, and that's all good and well, but it's also an opportunity to reach out to folks who maybe don't have as many of those resources. So it sort of depends on what your opportunities are. It helps teachers and caregivers with providing hands-on opportunities for kids, and that may sound almost redundant, right? Teachers and caregivers are supposed to be doing that. But as somebody who myself has taught and also has 3 small children at home, creating an activity around these things and making sure that there's some structure around it and thought behind it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of planning. And unfortunately, a lot of teachers are incredibly overdrawn, and as are many caregivers. And often, you kind of go with the path of least resistance. You go with the thing that requires the least amount of effort sometimes, just because it's hard. It takes a lot of resources and planning and time. But doing this kind of outreach makes it easier for people to be able to provide that for the kids in their care. exposes kids to content and expertise they may not otherwise have access to. And this is really on topic in the sense that a lot of the core curriculum that's around is really very basic and fundamental, and like, oh, here's a tree, look, it's getting bigger, you know, and it's often doesn't necessarily root itself in current issues and concerns that that might be relevant to these kids immediately as they are starting to age into adulthood and have to make decisions about these things and make decisions on purchasing or trip planning or what college they go to or whatever. All of these things are affected by that. It helps create a spark for kids to explore topics later. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in just a moment, but just because you're doing an outreach program, and a lot of people are like, well, you have to do this ongoing thing to make a big effort. And I'm saying that's maybe not true, because planting that seed and creating that spark for the kids actually has really high impact depending on how you design your program. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. It provides a platform for the kids to discuss science with their families and friends. I mean, I don't know how many of you remember when you were a kid, or if you have a niece or nephew or whatever child, if you you know, got excited about something at school, like the first thing you do as a kid is you go home and you're like, whatever, and you talk about the cool thing that you were really excited about. And so by creating these more hands-on activities, the kids have a chance to have something to discuss once they kind of go home to their families and friends. And it exposes undergrads, grad students, postdocs to the K through 12 educational world. And some might argue that that maybe is not necessary. And I argue to the contrary, because all of these people are at some point going to come in contact with that world, whether it's because you eventually have children of your own, and so it's good to know what the culture around those things are. Perhaps it's because you're thinking about teaching as a career, and it's helpful to know what that culture looks like. And perhaps it's because you want to know how to tailor your message to different audiences. And having presentation skills and being aware of who your audience is a really clutch and important thing that I find isn't necessarily as emphasized as it could be in a lot of graduate programs and things like that, even undergraduate programs. And of course, it's fun and kids are cool. So, you know, that's certainly part of it. What I really want to caution, and I guess this is part of my role here, but it's not. This isn't just a thing I'm writing just to write, but I really truly believe this, that the reason we do outreach must not become because I have to or because it's expected of me, because that's we're missing the point. It's not about you who is doing outreach. It is about the people that you serve, and that lens is the lens through which we have to look at everything that we do. And like I said, having run these programs for a number of years, it is often a lot of work. It's a lot of behind the scenes work and things that aren't necessarily visible, but that's not, you know, you don't do that because you want somebody to pat you on the back and be like, oh, good job. You know, it's because you know that in the end, it creates this product and this experience for the kids that has a really big impact. So that's why you do it. And if you put on that lens, then the work becomes valuable and important. And if we live in the lens of, well, I have to, then it becomes onerous and it doesn't give the same benefits, I think, that it could have if you look at it through a different lens. So here's some inspiration for you. And I have a few anecdotes that I wanted to share with you. Any of my former students who have ever been in my class will tell you I love to tell stories and sometimes tie them into things. So this is a few stories about things that might hopefully inspire your thoughts here. So the first story has to do with, this was a first grade class that we went to and we were doing GAC. In fact, this child right here is my daughter when she was in first grade. She's now in fifth grade. She does not look like that anymore, but this has been doing this for a while, as I said. And you might say to yourself, lady, you are crazy. You're going into a first grade class. Not only are you having them make GAC, because we all know that's a giant mess and disaster, but also I very much on purpose use the word polymer in that lesson. And you might think to yourself, that's psycho. Why would a first grader care or know or need to know about the word polymer? Right? They don't even know what an atom is or a molecule or any of these structures. None of that is even cross their minds. So the key here, of course, is to bring it to the level of the kids so that they can understand it, right? So we talked about, atoms are more like building blocks, and we built things together. I actually brought in little blocks and we built things, and then we made like a daisy chain of them. And we talked about how, these big molecules, right? Atoms make molecules, and molecules can come together and make big molecules, and those are polymers. And, that was the level at which we kept it, but they can understand that basic concept. But then what happened is, because I used that word, I had a mother approach me a number of weeks later, maybe even months, and say, are you the lady who did that outreach? I said, well, yeah. And she said, well, my daughter was in that class and she remembered that it was all about polymers, and we were at the library and she saw this ad about a thing from, I think, like GlaxoSmithKline or somebody was running a summer program, and she saw the word polymer. She got so excited. She's like, I know what that is. That's like the GAC thing that we did. Got super excited, insisted her mother sign her up for this program. And then, because of how excited this little girl was, her sister then insisted that she also wanted to do it because her sister was excited about it. And so something simple like just using real words and not kind of dumbing down some of the terminology means that when they encounter these things in the world around them, then they can engage with it and learn more about it within the context of what they come in contact with. Second anecdote I wanted to share is this emotional response to science outreach. Those of you who have been in enough meetings with me know that I have a tendency to act as though I'm on high quality uppers sometimes, where I have a lot of enthusiasm for what I do, and it is probably my downfall and also my best feature. But I get excited about it, and especially when I really love what I'm doing, it is something that I really communicate. I can't help myself. And this is the approach that I always communicate to anyone who's presenting in front of kids. You need to be that level of excited. And when you're that level of excited, the kids feed off of that. And that's true of any presentation you're in. For what it's worth, you don't need to be necessarily super pumped. You don't have to like channel your inner Guron, but at the same time, having that level of energy is going to get people excited about what you have to say. And so this is kind of the approach that I've always shared with my students that I've worked with, and my own approach to this. And what inevitably has happened is that, in pre-COVID times, when we would come and do one of these hands-on outreach experiences with the kids, is they all knew me pretty quickly. Word got around, even though we only went to maybe one or two classes periodically, within about a year, everyone knew me and everyone knew who I was. And I would walk around and some random kid in the hallway would stop me and say, are you? I was like, whoa, no, wait, whose class are you in? And they would tell me the teacher's name. And if the answer was yes, they would be like, and they would like run off and be all excited. And if the answer is like, oh, no, not today, they would, oh, and it's just this palpable feeling about it. And I thought to myself, if I can get the kid stopping me in a hallway, being that level of excited about doing science in their classroom, I'm doing something right. And that's really an important piece to it. And if the kids can have a positive experience and a positive emotion coming out of science, that is something that can carry them through when it might become more difficult, when it does involve more math and maybe their math skills are where they are, or maybe it becomes hard because they have to think about critical thinking, and that's something that doesn't come naturally to everybody. But if they have a positive emotion associated with it, it makes it easier to get over that hurdle. The third piece of inspiration here comes actually from one of my former undergrads, who actually just recently got married, which good for her. Emily was one of those students who I actually had her in class. She was a freshman when I had her, and incredibly, incredibly talented person. So brilliant, but, always sort of doubting herself and always thinking, maybe I'm doing this wrong, or, second guessing herself, or, she would always ask questions of just reaffirmation. not because she was incapable, but because she just just hadn't gotten there yet. You know, she didn't realize her potential and her ability. And I remember I had shared that we were doing this and some, you know, outreach activities, and she went right for it. She said, "Oh, yeah, I think I'd like to do that." And I thought to myself, well, she's really quiet. She doesn't say much, but sure, why not? You know, let's see what happens. So we had this whole, you know, training session, so to speak. You know, we worked through a lesson with her. And, you know, we did a dry run. One of my favorite things to do is pretend I am a third grader when I do my dry runs with students that are working with me. I get to channel my obnoxious 9-year-old self. And, you know, as we're doing this, I noticed she was really kind of loosening up. And then we get to the school and she does this presentation in front of these kids. And it was like a totally different human had appeared out of this person that I had known, this person who had previously felt very kind of scared and kind of uncertain and just really quiet and just needed reassurance, really, 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 really brilliant, but just didn't quite have it. And all of a sudden, I mean, it just came out and she was a natural. I mean, just her timing was like impeccable. And she talked to the kids in a way that they really connected with. And, you know, she worked with me for all 4 years. And, you know, I know that, you know, it's one of the things that she credits as having helped her with really building her confidence and finding who she was the fact that she realized that when she worked with kids and when she, you know, was in that setting, she could find her confidence and she found her voice there. So it sounds, you know, maybe sounds like it could be, oh, well, I'm just taking an hour to do this. But I just want to encourage you with a little bit of inspiration from actual real humans who had really very promising experiences coming out of these things. So one of the benefits of doing this too is you get these delightful cards from the kids, which always cracks me up. Now, when I grow up, I want to be a science test. Always, I had that up on my wall for quite a few years. It's a great one. So at one point, I had gathered some grant funding to try to promote this program that I was leading. And part of that involved a little bit of assessment around some of the experiences that the kids had. And of course, this isn't statistical, like in any way, statistically significant in any way, but it was interesting to note some of the patterns. When I looked at the girls' attitudes about science versus the boys, the girls, the longer we work with them, the more their attitudes increased in the positive direction, having to do with science. And I don't know if that's just because they had more exposure to it or because there was a lot of us who were women who were leading the charge, right? So that's, you know, possible that was part of it. For the younger students, having that hands-on science experience, when I actually had a control group that I had sort of gauged against. One of the questions was basically, you know, how do you feel about science, you know? And there was this huge jump for the kids who actually had the hands-on science experiments versus the kids that didn't. They just really, you know, got a lot more enthusiasm. And like I mentioned, having those positive experiences, certainly something we want to have the kids having before they engage in some of the more complex ideas. Interestingly, we found that older kids consistently showed lower ratings for excitement in science, desire to become a scientist than the younger kids. And I found that really heartbreaking, honestly, because it seemed to point to societal developmental factors that affected attitudes about science and their abilities. I know 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, like that's a tough age. There's a lot of self-awareness that comes up and challenges associated with that. But it was just kind of interesting to me. It made me feel like, you know, we really not only do we want to hit the young kids, but we want to make sure we don't neglect the older kids so that we make sure that we keep them in the fold as we continue our work forward. So how do we motivate future scientists? And so the question here, and I want to engage you for a moment. I threatened you earlier that this was going to be an involved experience where I want you to participate. So I'm holding to my threat. I'm going to go ahead and put this into the chat. Give me one moment here. So I'm curious actually to hear just all you do, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and bring up that particular page so you can take a quick look at what that looks like. And I'm sure some of you already have it up. But I'm going to go ahead and screen share just so you can see how this works. It's not coming up the way I want it to, but that's okay. Yep, there we go. So the way that this works, I kind of filled it in first for myself. So my mother she has just retired, as a matter of fact. I was a physics teacher, and my father was a mathematics professor. I was kind of screwed, let's be honest, from the very beginning. I was doomed to go in this path. But I also really love to think empirically. I know that it was something I always like to do. I love doing experiments on random things. And I like fire. I like the idea of blowing things up. So, it feels like all of us had some aspect of that. So what I'm asking each of you to do is, if you go over here to this left-hand side where you see sticky note, I don't care what color you make it, go ahead and share with us what were some of the things that made you like science or want to be a scientist. So that are some of the earlier memories that you have from when you were a kid. I'm loving these answers, by the way. If there are more than one, feel free to share more. Any others? I'd love to get some more feedback here. What made you want to do it? Oh, awesome. Awesome. Love it. Bring it out. So we have enjoying mixing potions from household chemicals, which I'm sure gave somebody's parent a small heart attack, as getting in arguments about things with the other kids and wanting to be right. That's certainly one of the things that gets at those science ideas, hands-on aspect of science classes, right? I also like fire. See, it's a good thing. Fire is a good element. Science Museum had a model of the Earth orbiting the sun. That's awesome. Yeah, so those experiences where you engage with something in a different way, in a tactile way. Fifth grade science teacher was an animated man, always encouraged us, let us have fun with the process of learning, making songs, drawing rather than memorization. That's a really good point, right? The way that we are taught is a big deal. In fact, my 10th grade chemistry teacher, I will never ever forget her. She is like why I went into chemistry, because I just absolutely loved being in her class, and she just made it so awesome and so fun. Loved big questions that sometimes teachers couldn't answer them, which made me more curious. Oh, I love that. Socially unacceptable to be anything else. That's true. That, I certainly can appreciate that. I'm from Poland, and it was very much, you need to go into science or you're not going to get a job. That was what I was told. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. It was convenient that I happen to like it, but I can imagine that there are definitely cultural aspects too. Always loving having anything to do with beauty, symmetry, structure, and an absolute sense of right and wrong. Science experiments and math don't have as much of a language barrier. Absolutely, right? So we have all these different ideas. Science is less vague, wanting to learn more, not stopping, continuing towards whatever the next deeper level is. And I'm sure those of you who have been in grad school for a while are aware that the longer that you study something, the more you realize how little you actually know. I remember having that moment in grad school where I was like, I thought I was smart. I don't know anything. But it's good. It's good, humbling experience, right? So thank you for sharing that. I want to kind of keep that seed planted for yourself, because we're going to build on that in just a moment. Because the next aspect of this is, all right, if we're here, sorry, there we go. So what got us interested in science as a career? You know, we have this idea, and by the way, this kid cracks me up. I just love him. Travis is just one of those kids who just like lives life to the fullest, and he just thought this was the coolest thing in all the world. Like this in my previous position, I did it all just because I wanted to do it, and this was my payment right there. That look on that kid's face was my payment, was knowing that he loved that and got such a kick out of it. So now this is a follow-up to the previous question, which I will paste that in there for you because it has a different URL. And the follow-up to that question is, what is the most memorable educational activity that you've been in, science or not? It doesn't have to be specifically science. So let me share with you again. I have that up as well. So hopefully you guys are making your way over there. And I'll go ahead and share mine. I had a social studies teacher in 7th grade who he was teaching us about the revolution and Paul Revere, and he literally got on his chair, wrote it backwards, and started running around the room going, I, to this day, have like Mr. Fitzmyer in my head doing this around the room. And it's those kinds of things that really get you, whether it's the way, I mean, really, I want to avoid saying that it's a particular teacher, but what is the activity itself? What is it? There's just something that sticks in your head about something that made something really memorable for you. Doesn't have to be science at all. So I'm not sure who put the Richard Feynman one on there. What was it about the way that was presented? So if you want to build on that, that would be helpful.
You're very difficult material, fully animated. The guy's jumping
Excellent.
around the room. It's
Beautiful.
exactly like
see, there's that enthusiasm, right?
it's the same thing you were just talking about. Okay, at the lower level, but now you've got somebody who's talking at the highest possible level. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I'll give you guys another few minutes again. If you want to add in a few, if there's a couple, go ahead and add another as we wait for people to chime in. Yeah, so just as a reminder, if you're trying to find the sticky notes, they are on the left-hand panel here. If you mouse over it, it says sticky note, and then you can type something in there and then just hit save and it'll go ahead and post. So I think a couple people might have popped on a little bit later. These are great. These are amazing. Excellent. I see we have a number of people on here that does not equal the number of sticky notes. If I could please ask for a few more, that would be amazing. This is also just seeding our thoughts here. Using arms and legs to demonstrate bending and wagging modes in organic chem. The old electron gun explaining how old TV screens used to work. I love this banana one about the elementary school teacher saying, if you could divide by 0, then you could be a banana. This is amazing. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for participating in that activity. The reason that I wanted to talk about that for a moment is that I want to emphasize that it's those things that get us excited, right? Those are the things that make you decide what you want to do with your life, in addition, obviously, to your own propensity and accessibility and resources and things like that. But it's those kinds of things that can be that spark that gets you to the other side. And in my mind, that is any outreach program has the capacity to be able to do that. So if you are in fact in a space where there is a school that maybe doesn't have the resources to be able to provide some of these things, then we can be that space. You can be that space as somebody who participates in an outreach program. And that's a really great strength and a great opportunity. So moving in there and keep those little seeds planted, because we're going to go ahead and talk about that in a little bit there. So I want to share with you a little bit of what we're doing with the CSSM. So let me preface this initially with this is based loosely off of what I've done in the past. And the idea really is that we have some sort of hands-on experiment, something that the kids really have to interact with, kind of get dirty. What happens is I always try to have something physical that they take out of there with them, if they so choose. Of course, if they want to throw it out, they will throw it out. But what happens is, sometimes we'll make a craft. Sometimes we'll make, there's one that we do make this like a craft where they use Epsom salts and they dry it out and they crystallize it. And then we use cell phone microscopes, which are like $5 a pop. Very good use of your time. If any of you have a niece, nephew, child, anybody who is excited about those things, they cost like $5 and they just fit like right over your cell phone lens, which is really, really cool. And you just walk around your house and like look at stuff, and kids think that's like amazing. Let's be honest, I think it's amazing. So definitely a cool thing. So, these kids would paint with basically solutions of Epsom salts and water. And then that would evaporate. And we talked about the difference between crystalline solids and amorphous solids. And then they would look at it under a microscope and they could actually see how that looks under a microscope, which turns out to be very, very cool. But that's the idea, is that they have something to bring with them. The idea, of course, also is that we don't want to add an extra burden for teachers. We want to help teachers. So in every case possible, I always try to integrate it with whatever their curricular stuff is at that time. And so if they're working on charts, we throw in a chart. If they're working on sentence structure, we make sure that we add questions that force them to write certain sentences. And so that's kind of the cool part of integrating these different ideas. We want to make sure that that's the case. And as much as possible, I like to have, undergrads, graduate students, postdocs to be participating in really delivering these lessons. I've been teaching for almost 15 years. And so I don't necessarily feel like I need to spend a lot more time staring and talking at people. But the, undergraduates and graduate students and postdocs, they haven't had that experience yet. So my hope is to, in my standing and talking at people, to encourage others to stand and talk in front of people. So those are sort of the 3 cornerstones, sort of helping the teachers to bring something hands-on for the kids so that they can have something to take home with them and share with their parents. And then, of course, providing that space for trainees to be able to have that experience and to understand what that's like. So our activity is designed around the CSSM goals, which of course, all of we're out here to try to separate metals for good, if you will. And some of those methods, despite the fact that these are kids, they are really can be very simplified, right? We can think about magnetism or size of particles, density, solubility, polarity. Those are all things that we're thinking about. We may not call it that directly, but we're talking about it at a very high level within the center. But with the kids, you can kind of keep it to the basics. You know, what are ways that you can separate things where you don't have to sit there and painstakingly try to like pluck it out of a mixture, right? Not that you can do that out of ore or recycled e-waste, right? But the idea being, how can you create a process that does that? Our aim is to partner with Title I schools that are local regionally to our partner institutions. Title I schools are schools that have 40% or at least 40% of the population that are under a certain income level. And so they are entitled to things like free lunches, additional support staff, things like that. So these are schools that tend not to have as many resources. So we want to try to help provide that. What we'll do is we'll have bulk supplies sent to our partner institutions for the individual kit building, and these demo videos, which a number of you that are on this call are already working on, which is awesome, and I'm super grateful. You're going to be providing some of that that learning to the kids, and certainly I'll work with you to create something that will speak to them. And what we'll do is we'll have sort of an outreach hour later on and assemble these kits, and we'll distribute them together with these videos and the online assessments. So they start off with something that looks vaguely like this, and then when they're done, hopefully they'll finish up having these things separated out into different phases. So in designing something like this, and keep in mind this, I've been focusing on K through 12, but a lot of these things do apply to spaces beyond K through 12 schools. We want to identify stakeholders. So no matter what your program is, one of those first steps is to figure out who cares, like who's going to benefit or who wants something from you out of this program. So that might be, in our case, the NSF. Like they want to know if this is worth their while. Are we doing what they want us to do? The individual institutions that we have that are represented, PIs themselves, right? They have certain goals that they would like. Trainees, those K through 12 teachers and administrators, the students, and of course, oddly enough, the parents of those students, right? They are actually stakeholders in some of the work that we're doing, and that's something to keep in mind. Again, thinking about we're not an island. We are, in fact, part of a much larger thing. So we want to identify what these people expect from us. What is it that they want? So, you know, the NSF, for example, they want to make sure that they're supportive of a community to justify the cost of funding this program to taxpayers. Like that's kind of where they're coming from. And I certainly appreciate that. The institutions, they want to market and program this programming so that they can get more alumni to support, and so they can get more community support around it, and build that community around activities that support the larger community so they can create that space. Different PIs, you know, you want to show a good faith effort toward bringing your work to the public and ensure more support for from the institution and the NSF. Trainees, right? You want to gain experience, not only with presentations, but potentially looking into, hey, do I want to do education? Is this a thing I want to do? I don't know. This is a way to test this out, right? These teachers and administrators, right? They want to maintain good connections with universities because they can get benefits from that. They can get access to experts and things like that from there. And of course, have the benefits from learning with a relatively small time investment. The kids, they want to have fun and they want to engage in science. They want to learn something and have fun doing it. And they want to have something to talk about with their friends and family. And of course, those parents also want to have their kids educated in a meaningful way and to be able to have some conversation around that. So when we think about meeting those stakeholder expectations, you know, we can think about this program that I just, you know, outlined and says, okay, well, we're crossing over several geographic regions. We're trying to serve underrepresented groups and we want to support taxpayer priorities. That's something the NSF cares about. And that's one of the things we're thinking about. By the way, this background here is one of those cell phone microscope pictures of those Epsom salts, which is really cool. You would not expect it to be that cool, and it super is. Highly recommended if you're feeling bored on a Saturday night, because obviously all of you are thinking about that. You know, we want to make sure we have proper promotion efforts on social media, alumni newsletters. That brings positive attention to the institution. Every institution wants positive attention. That's just across the board. That's what keeps them afloat, you know, is people coming in through the door. You know, we want to address service requirements and help promote future and further funding. For trainees, you know, we want to provide that training, and you can experiment with teaching strategies, presentation methods, see if this is something that you want to do with your life, you know, and maybe it is and maybe it's not, or maybe it's just some small aspect. For the K through 12 teachers, they get that expert help in a subject matter. You guys are the experts in this case, and that may not be obvious to some of you, but yeah, as we're presenting these lessons, we have undergrads and graduate students and postdocs, and you are the experts who are communicating this idea to a bunch of people who aren't the experts, And of course, for the kids, it's learning science safely. And there are aspects of social justice that are built into these lessons that are inherent to what the CSSM does, right? Our whole idea is to try to have these sustainable methods of reclaiming these things, which just as Salim just spoke about, have social justice components to it. And of course, parents want something for their kids to be able to do and engage in and have these activities to bring home. So there's also, of course, non-school-based outreach. So things like museums, camps, scouts, like scout badges, things like that, podcasts, blogs, art installments, libraries. I'm focused a lot of time on the K through 12 schools-based stuff. That's most of what I've done, but that doesn't mean these things aren't valuable, and they're actually really important. And of course, as I'm highlighting here, this is outreach that the CSSM has done with partnered with Museum, the Science History Institute. And so there are aspects to be able to teach and reach out to the community in different ways beyond what I've described thus far. And that some of you have already expressed that in terms of, museum exhibits and stuff that really captured your attention and things like that. But I don't know about you, but I mean, I listened to, I'm having a moment. What is it called? It's got not John Green, Hank Green. Cannot think of the name of it. Does anybody else listen to this? It's a very animated and very cool podcast, but it's about basically current issues in science, and it's really, really well done. And that's a method of outreach. It happens also to be his way of earning money, but it's just kind of a neat opportunity. All right, so it's time to participate. Whoops. Time to participate, and spoiler alert, our talk is it's slowly morphing into our workshop. You may not be noticing it, but it is. So if you go to where it says your sort of toolbar is, you can mouse over and you will find a bar. And that bar, there is a thing that says annotate on it. If you click on annotate, you have the option to do things like stamp, draw, whatever. So let's say I want to do a star. I want to ask you guys if you can share with me what are some of the main types of learning that you most identify with. Are you more of a visual learner, a tactile learner, or an auditory learner? So for example, I am a visual learner, so I'm going to put a star there. And if more than one applies, go ahead and just annotate. I'll give a couple more moments here for people to think. A lot of visual learners. There's clearly something to be said there. For a bunch of people who have spent many years in the lab. All right. So as we're looking at this, you can see that, we happen to clump largely in the visual learning territory, but I, for example, do really well in tactile learning as well. Sometimes I need to actually just touch and see something and hold it in my hands to get a sense of it. And of course, auditory learning has to do with like listening and taking things in through your hearing. And the reason that I wanted to share this is because I wanted to give you a sense of the fact that there are these different modes of taking in information. I'm going to go ahead and clear this because it sticks around to the next slide, which will not be very helpful. There we go. And what I want us to do real quick here is to really think about how your targeted mode of learning might influence the type of outreach activities you might think about pursuing. So for example, if you're thinking about hands-on experiments, you're favoring tactile learning, but of course it's also visual learning because they're looking at what they're handling, right? So there is that aspect. And then from the people who are in your group, I want you to pick one outreach activity from the ones presented in the group, one idea that you have, and just brainstorm what that might look like so that it can be inclusive of all learners. Because remember, when you go and you do it as a museum or an art installment or a blog or a podcast or a experiment in a classroom, you are interfacing with every kind of learner. You're interfacing with every kind of person. And perhaps you might have somebody who is hearing impaired, or maybe they're visually impaired. So you want to make sure that there are ways that that person can still engage with what it is that you're trying to do. So I'm going ahead to put you in breakout rooms for this. And there isn't any specific prompt beyond what is right here. So again, think about your targeted mode of learning and how that influences what you might do. And then think about an outreach activity in your group and brainstorm what that would look like to be inclusive of all learners. So those are your charges at the moment. Questions on that? Okay. All righty. So let me go ahead and get people into a room. And we'll keep it relatively simple because I know people are in different places here. I'll just do 2 rooms. I think that'll be fine.
Can you paste the tasks, those 2 tasks in the chat too, Marta?
I can, although I think it goes away once you go into your smaller room, which is slightly annoying, but I will be happy to do that. And if you want to, maybe it won't, and maybe I'm wrong, and that's entirely, I'm happy to be wrong in this case, but I will be happy to do that. Yep. Give me 1 second. All right, so that's there. Alrighty, so you have about 10 to 15 minutes to work on this because we're gonna keep building on this. We are morphing into workshop time, just in case you may not have noticed. Alrighty. We can often make bigger, bolder statements conceptually by stripping away the jargon and focusing on the concept, and then bringing the jargon back once people have a general sense of the concept. So that is a really common tool that can be useful for explaining a lot of those science type things. Yeah. So I want to just talk a little bit more about this. So it's a little weird looking at myself, but that's fine. What does it mean to be inclusive in outreach? And the reason I share this picture is because you can see this was kind of the assembly of kits for, I think, 75 kids. We were providing resources, right? To the extent that we could. Our goal was really to present those resources so it was all ready for them to just grab and use. We want to make sure we have representation in our outreach leaders. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier when I had said, well, you know, we had Perhaps we had more buy-in from the girls who were in the program a little longer because we had a lot of female leadership. So trying to make sure we have a bit of representation of different kinds of people with different backgrounds is important. A handful of you I know mentioned minimizing barriers to entry, and that's absolutely true. One of my key things that I've always worked on is how do we make it easier for people to do things? I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And if possible, introduce social justice concerns related to science, because that's a lot of how people are engaging with science, even though they don't recognize it that way. And so part of our task is to really make that connection for people. So this is about providing resources. Notice these are people, clearly COVID times, all distanced in their masks. We were assembling these kits for all these kids, and here is some more of them. So we want to provide them in a form that's easy and safe for people to work with. So obviously that does limit you a bit, is providing a safe space for that. Easy to scale according to needs. So if you have 10 kids versus 100 kids, you don't want that to be a huge onerous task to have to scale it up if you need to. As much as possible, my basement, I will admit, is completely filled with a bunch of stuff from outreach that I've reused over and over and over again. So it helps cut down costs. It's better for the world and the environment. And I think it does a really good job of kind of putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. And of course, disposable when necessary, right? Like we do, in fact, still have to, like, they do make a mess, and like we have to distribute these things in a way that's, you know, cogent and relatively sanitary. So, you know, that does in fact involve some consumables. And again, provided free of charge to those served. So that is a resource unto itself. We need to make sure that we're not burdening people. When we think of representation, notice again, there's a cell phone microscope. They're looking at those Epsom salt crystals, which is pretty cool. Outreach work can be done by anyone. So take stock of the strengths in your group and utilize them. So I know a number of you are involved in recording these videos. Maybe one of you is better at organizing the information, and maybe another one of you is really good at finding audiovisual aids, or maybe one of you is really good at coming up with some sort of demo that would make it easier. Like whatever that is, figure out what those strengths are and utilize them. Make good use of those things. Volunteers with the least opportunities will find barriers to entry most daunting. So in a lot of these things, what happens is that if you are engaging with kids face-to-face, most places require you to get fingerprinting and FBI checks, and it's a giant nightmare. It takes a long time. It really does. In my former position, I was able to sort of negotiate with our legal department, where I basically said, look, if the classroom teacher is there and they are the main caretaker and they're the mandated reporter, and I'm there and I've been, you know, fingerprinted and background checked and all the other stuff, is there a way that we could make it so the students don't have to? And we ended up negotiating a plan that made it so all they had to do was basically sign off and say, yes, I read this thing that says I should behave in such a way, and that was it. And that was great, because for people who didn't want to make that huge commitment, it was a really nice low barrier. And that's one of the things that I'm, you know, as much as COVID's a pain in the butt, doing this using YouTube and kind of delivering kits does help us circumvent some of that. Unfortunately, also means we don't have as much of an opportunity to interface with the kids. So like there's drawbacks too.
Marta, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there are quite a lot of Penn. I can't speak for the other institutions, but at the Penn, and a lot of us are fingerprinted and FBI background checked, because there is a program where a lot of us will work with high school students in the summer. Just, I wasn't sure if you knew that.
That's good. That is good. That is good information to know, for sure. I know that that's not universal though. Like I think that that's very institution dependent. So that's something I'd have to sort of dig around with our other partner institutions and get a sense of where that is. But yeah, that's really helpful knowledge. Thanks, Max. You know, inclusion and diversity maximizes impact for kids, right? If they see people who are in front of them who look like them, who remind them of themselves, they're going to see themselves more in those roles. And that's not news to most of you. And of course, representation and diversity efforts signals to the community that all are welcome. And that's a really important thing. If we're forward facing to the community, that's a really important piece of it. Assessment is another piece, right? We need to remember who our stakeholders are. So sometimes they need to know how many eyeballs were on the activity. Sometimes it just comes down to that, which physical numbers. Sometimes they want to know, was there a change in the attitude of the people that were engaged? Maybe they went from hating science to loving science magically over the course of 5 minutes, right? Like, who knows? But like sometimes like you can get lucky. Integration into other activities, like that's an assessment piece. Like they want to know, hey, if you're doing such and such a thing, how does this thing interface with the other things that you're doing? And if it just feels like it's out in left field, they're not going to take it as seriously. Sometimes it's mastery of content. Hey, did they learn something? You know, when they came in, did they know this? And when they left, did they know more? Inclusion of diverse demographics, that's another assessment piece. You know, are we really making sure that we are inclusive in our efforts? And of course, volunteer outcomes. You know, are the graduate students or the undergraduates or the postdocs, are they having an outcome that is reflective of their experience in the outreach? So this is from the NSF standpoint. This is how they think about assessment, and depending on who's funding you, they might be thinking about all of those things. So the last part of this, of course, is promoting your efforts. So it's necessary to communicate with your stakeholders. And this is the part that I think often gets left out because I think especially, I know I always feel weird about it because I always feel like I'm tooting my own horn. I'm like, look how awesome I am. I work with the kids, right? Like I feel that way sometimes. But then I remind myself that it's not about me. Not about me. It's about who we're serving. It's about our stakeholders. And that's where you all of a sudden realize, nope, you got to come at this from a very different place. They need to know that this is happening. It creates interest around your outreach efforts. So you might bring in new members. When I first started my outreach effort at my other institution, I think we had 6 people. By the time I left, we had 109. So like, you know, it matters. People tell them, oh, I had a really great time doing this. You should come with me. And by the time you're done, you end up having a lot of engagement. It acts as an avenue to positive internet presence for volunteers for future career development. And for those of you who are here, most of you, I think, are either grad students or postdocs, or I think a couple of undergrads. This is something that, and this I'm sharing now from a personal perspective, having a positive internet presence that is searchable if your potential employer Googles you is really, really clutch. I mean, it really is. So as much as it might be like, well, I don't want to put my name out there, or I don't want to put my name on this caption photo that I have of me working with these kids or putting together these kits or whatever. It may sound like, and I appreciate, you know, wanting to protect your privacy and all, but I've looked at people who have stayed off the internet, and I've looked at my experiences, and I've tried really hard to put forward a positive internet presence for myself and in social media. And I know for a fact that people have Googled me prior to applying for jobs, and they see that the first 2 pages are basically just me doing stuff that's related to sustainability and outreach. And when they see that, you are now telling your future employer, this is something I do, this is something I have experience with, and you don't have to prove it as hard. You're in an interview and you're not like, you don't have to be like, well, and then I did this thing. They already know because they've already Googled you. I guarantee they've Googled you. So having a positive internet presence, you know, associated with science and outreach and any of these things is really a good thing for you. So, you know, my like little plug here, you know, put it on your Twitter feed. You're a CCM sustainability ambassador. I know it sounds weird. I know we might be like, I don't want to do that. But that is something that if they, you know, somebody searches on a hashtag or looks for that later, or they're looking at sustainability, hey, what do you know about sustainability? They may go to Twitter and they may look at that and they'll be like, oh, guess what? This person was involved in this thing. And all of a sudden you get a little bit more credibility with that employer. I cannot overstate how important that is. Advertise this program for future support, right? So if you are trying to find funding for this, it's helpful to have that. And of course, it provides a positive media presence for the university or the company you're working with. Whether you go into industry or academia, all of these places have some commitment to the community around them. And so if they are able to say, hey, look, our people, our team did blah, 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 then whoever it is who's looking at them is like, oh, they have a commitment to the community. So like, we think they're important. So these are things. And of course, communicating about the values of the group with the public is an important aspect of that as well. So it's a kind of underappreciated part of it. So you have one more workshop time. in our last little bit of time here. And I'm going to put you back in the same breakout rooms, but I'm going to make your life a little bit easier. And then I'm going to send you to a very specific link. So it's a little bit easier for you to do this. And I actually want you to write on it. It's a very specific request to please write and write down your responses for this, because it'll be easier for, I'm actually kind of mining your thoughts here in terms of what are some things that we can conceive of doing. So if you go over here, basically there's a handful of questions, 4 questions quite specifically. I want you to think about one activity in particular. Whoops. I want you to think about one activity in particular. Pick one, doesn't really matter which one. And I want you to just answer a few of these questions around it. How can you make it inclusive? Who, you know, how do we build around these things? And don't spend a ton of time trying to pick one, just pick something that seems reasonable. Preferably not the thing I spent all my time talking about, which was K-12 outreach in schools. So pick something non-school based, all right? And then answer those questions in there, and then we'll report back and then we're done. All right, you guys are the best. Come on, what you got? What did you come up with?
Take it away, Christian.
Okay. All right. So let me just pull up our Google Doc. Okay. So we had the idea from Jared of the growing crystals out of rock candy. And so we were thinking about the kinds of resources that we need for our activity. And we were thinking access to like commercial chemicals, stuff that you can buy like for cheap, stuff that's readily available and stuff that's safe. Proper equipment would also be necessary for this. We were thinking in terms of like a wow factor, having rock candy, like how's rock candy formed through this, through growing crystals. And then for minimizing barriers to entry, we were thinking about like promoting this through social media that exists nowadays. If this is a school promoted event, like say having flyers sent to parents, PTA announcements, emails, even live stream it too. So I know that we're existing in the age of COVID right now. I'm not sure like how schools are right now in terms of like being fully in person versus like part remote. So live streaming event would be really like handy for kids who happen to be at home that day.
Yeah.
Live streaming again, recording the session, that's also really good. In terms of gauging success, maybe like polling students, like asking like, oh, like what'd you get out of this? Like view numbers could also help too. We had a little bit of a difficult time, but in terms of like gauging, like what are the metrics for success?
Yeah, the whole career is committed to that. So that's, you know, that's completely understandable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Group 2, what'd you guys come up with?
Separation Saturdays. Madeline, elaborate.
Oh God. All right, so Sam did most of the writing. I'd have to find it again. But basically, we were gonna target not necessarily K through 12, but try to throw in everybody. And so one of the things that came up this past weekend, at least for me, because we had 2 defenses, were that apparently they used to do science talks in the bars.
Oh, that's funny.
And so we kind of thought about that, and we're like, well, you could do it at like a bar and restaurant, so then you could incorporate all ages. And then Marta popped in, and she was talking about how you could also potentially do like a quiz type of thing. And Max was talking about how he remembers going to something, and anytime anybody would answer a question, the person that was speaking would throw them like a Hershey's Kiss or something. And it didn't have to be right, but any engagement whatsoever, they would get something.
Sure.
And so that was kind of where we
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for your ideas, and thank you for doing the work around thinking about that. It really does help me to think about these things, and I appreciate that they're generated by all of you. So that means a lot. So I think those are really great ideas, and definitely certain aspects of that yeah, I hadn't even really thought about. I hadn't even considered like an outside venue like that. I think that's kind of a neat idea. What I want to do is just finish up here. I just have literally one slide, which is just, I want to make sure I say thank you to the right people here. So let me just get my acknowledgements up here real quick. Obviously, I want to thank Eric, who's made all of this kind of possible for us. Also, all of you guys, I know you guys keep getting emails from me, and I'm sure you're at this point, you're like, oh, it's Marta, delete, but like you somehow don't delete and you still come. So like, thanks. That was really cool. I appreciate that in ways I cannot express, that you're still maintaining that engagement and you know, being part of what we do. Current and past outreach volunteers, that's a lot of you, but also at other institutions, those kids who just literally, when they're like, wow, like your day is just better. Like it just is. It's just wonderful. And of course, the NSF for sponsoring all of our work. So thank you guys. Thank you for hanging in there with me. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. And if you have any questions or you want to hang back, that's fine. I'm here. Otherwise, have an awesome evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.